Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what I believe is the final session of the Joint Appointments Committee. And this is the one removed from several weeks ago. I start with apologies for absence, Louise.
None received, Chairman.
Disclosure of interest from anybody? No. Okay. Are you content with the minutes of the previous meeting, the 14th of January 2022? Thank you all. Item 4, salary benchmarking for the Joint Chief Executive Pay Award. Just get down to the right page of the papers. Any comments from anybody here? On any aspects that you want to raise? My understanding is that it's just for noting, because we don't have any particular.
Group's webcasting, so apologies. My take is that given the benchmarking in the report, that our Joint Chief Executive is relatively underpaid for the size of the combined authority, and that I think we should consider a pay rise in excess of that we have awarded within Guildford and Waverley, noting that Guildford is 3.75% as a general pay award and Waverley is 3%, to move him more in line with his peers, which is probably the third quartile, which is 150 to 166 on page 12 of the report. Where we sit within that, my own sense is towards the upper end, because I think Tom has started exceptionally well, and I think the responsibility has now across 300,000 residents, probably a couple of billion worth of assets, and 100 million budget. I think he needs to be remunerated appropriately. Is my personal view, Chairman.
Mine too. Any other comments?
So,
Councillor Mulliner.
I will take a slightly contrary view, not with I think the third band is the right place, but I think we should recognise we're at the very start of this, if you like. Not an enormous amount has happened yet, and I would think it more appropriate to see how the first year goes before being unduly uplifting. The fact that there's more assets and more residents, I don't think makes a huge difference to what the Chief Executive actually does. There's more people to talk to, certainly, and that's just so he's got more people under him for at least the first half of the year before the joint management team comes into place, and he'll be talking to them a lot more and in a lot more detail. So some increase should be, is certainly warranted, but given this is all meant to be a cost-saving exercise as well, even in an inflationary environment, I think that should slightly moderate our enthusiasm in this first year. If the whole thing becomes a galloping success by the end of the coming municipal year, then I think it will be appropriate to take a much more generous view. But I think we're at the start of a journey.
Can I quickly ask probably Francesca, I imagine, a question in this case? And in the summary at the end of the report, it's effectively recommended that a pay review in April 2022 should be considered. If we were to take a pay review into April 22, i.e. this month, what would the sort of step up be, or is that something for us to determine, or are there fixed percentages it would go up in such a review?
Well, as you know, Tom is on a spot grade, so the only potential for review is the annual pay award. it's normal that the chief exec is paid the same rate that the rest of the council is paid. So as Tom is employed by Waverley, that would normally be the same as the Waverley Pay Award, which is 3%. But there is budget, and the assumption is that Tom will receive somewhere between Waverley's 3% and Guildford's 3.75%. So if you wanted to do as Joss suggested and pay as much as possible, I would probably suggest 3.75% is a good place to pitch that. And I think that is Tom's expectation probably as well.
Jan? Apologies, Councillor Harwood.
It's all right. No, Jan's okay. To clarify, I think Joss was suggesting going above that figure was my indication, but actually perhaps it sounds like there isn't a scope for that. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think there is a scope to pay whatever percentage you decide is appropriate, but the budget has been made for 3.75% maximum.
Okay, so that's a pretty, okay, yeah.
I've a little bit of little uncomfortable as well about going higher than either of authorities' standard pay rise for regular staff as well. Peter, Councillor Clark, apologies.
Thank you, Councillor Fowlers. I appreciate what Councillor Muller was saying about if it was seen as an increase, then we should restrain ourselves. But is this not resetting what should have been done in the first place? It's just a question I have.
That's actually more where I see it as well. It's more, it is quite literally from a benchmarking paper, bringing it in line with industry standards, or at least trying to make it less out of whack with industry standards on this. In the case of this, our industry is local government. Any other comments?
Just comment that it seems to be, having looked at these things, there's a very wide range, and I think it's very difficult to pick one number and say that is it. I think team cohesion is going to be quite an important matter. And if you're going to be recruiting new people, which is a possibility, to the joint management team, I think what we do with this post is going to have a bearing on that. If I had to put a number on it, slightly between 3 and 3.75 would be lifting it from 150 to 155 for this year, because that actually takes you firmly into the third band, which is where we all feel the post deserves to be, without making too large a rod for our own back when it comes to recruiting others into the joint management team posts. So that's where I would be.
So the consensus does seem to be at least somewhere between 3 and 3.75, and I don't see anybody arguing particularly to go above 3.75, possibly Joss, but Councillor Bigmore, apologies. Councillor Harwood.
Well, I do understand Joss's argument, which is that you can't just ignore inflation, and if anything below that sort of inflation is technically a pay cut for everyone involved. So I think there is an argument for going above it, but I also partially agree with Councillor Mullen in that I think it's a little premature to be calling it a great success and start giving awards, so to speak. So on that basis, I think somewhere in that region is fine with me.
Probably worth also just pointing out, of course, that no staff at Guildford or Waverley had realistically a pay rise, considering the inflationary pressures at present. Joss.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the size of the authority is relevant because of the risk entailed in what we do, and I guess the number of population is not really there, but certainly the kind of the book of work at both councils is pretty significant at the moment, and I would say riskier than the majority of joint councils on this list. That being said, I do take the point. It would be hard to justify at this early stage a bigger than 3.75% increase, even if personally I think it's fully deserved. I think kind of the optics defined the starting salary of 150 when we did it, as opposed to strict benchmarking. But Tom was content to take the job on those grounds. So we arguably pitched it right. So I think, whether it's 3.5% or 3.75%, I would prefer 3.75%. I'm not going to die in a ditch over it. So I think that's where we're at. But I would strongly urge that this time next year, if if targets have been hit, that we have a proper look at this benchmarking and see that if there is a resetting of Tom's role and any of the shared management roles commensurate to the success of the partnership, or otherwise.
Yes, other than the budgetary limit, effectively capping it at 375 anyway, without looking at that in more detail, I think my personal view is that a more fulsome review would be more sensible once the joint management team are in place, because that will really define what the workload is and what the balance is. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. It's a question for HR. I'm not sure how often within the councils the salaries are benchmarked. Is it once a year or whatever? But I think we need to return to it at some point, perhaps in 12 months' time, if we can do that. So that's my question.
Francesca.
Yes, I can't answer for Waverley. I'm afraid I don't know how often they do their benchmarking exercise, and I will check that with Sally and come back to you if that's okay.
I think in this case, the request probably would be that we re-benchmark next year anyway, if we were looking at doing a more fulsome review of the role. I'm not sure what the costs are of that approach, but it'd be worth understanding that. I have one other question, Francesca, which is that if we were to set 375, which is effectively Guildford's limit rather than Waverley's limit, does that set a precedent in future for always taking the top limit of one of the authorities, or is it literally independent each time?
No, it wouldn't. It's a new appointment, and you are free to make whatever pay award you want to make. It will always be a guide what has been paid to the two councils, and I would assume you will always look at making some kind of award either between those or above those.
Okay, I'm going to make the proposal that we take 3.75 for the following reasons. One, it is what is budgeted for. Two, we all understood that 150 was on the lower end of the spectrum for the pay, for the spot pay for this particular role, and also in recognition for the work that has already happened quite successfully so far. I'd like to propose 375 as the number for today. Joss, you happy to second that?
Happy to second, Chairman.
Thank you. Any further comments before I bring that to a vote? Okay, all those in favour of the recommendation? That's agreed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Bear with me one moment. Item 5, exclusion of press and public. I believe I now don't have to read the lengthy spiel, so if you've all read the text of the exclusion notice, can I have all those in favour of moving to an exempt session? Thank you all.